sexual addictions, pornography, eroticized wounds. One of the major causes that I really wanted to get to today for the topic is the topic of emotional incest. Hey, it's another trigger-proof transmission, and as always, I don't plan them, and I just, boom, hit the go live button when I feel inspired to share. If this is the first time, first thing is first, I'm going to be talking about emotional incest. This has been coming up a lot in our Cycle Breakers communities. What is this? What is it? What is it? How does it impact your relationships? Why it's important for us to have the conversation, even though it's highly triggering, and what to do about it. Like, what is it that we can do? Because if we don't really learn what it is and where it all comes from and how it begins, we can't break that cycle, and healthy, secure relationships, partnerships where you're feeling emotionally safe become impossible. And we have all of the sexual shadows that are pervasive in today's society: pornography, infidelity, affairs, you name it. There's, incest, rape, date rape, you name it. Like, you name the problem with dysfunction with sexuality, and it's got something to do with this specific core wound that I'm gonna share, and it kind of passes through different forms. So I really want to start this conversation. And why am I having this conversation? As a chiropractor, I have no business having this conversation. That's why I left chiropractic, because I discovered that people who are coming in with stress-related disorders, and these stress-related disorders had everything to do with an upstream problem with their health, with their relationships. There's a breakdown. Let's use the term attachment when we're dealing with relationships. So these ruptured attachments, whether there's grief, death, divorce, breakup, it creates all sorts of chaos in the nervous system. And if you trace back to a lot of health issues, chronic health problems, that I would ask my patients, hey, what was going on in your life at the time, around 6 months around the time before you were diagnosed with this problem? Almost invariably, there was some sort of an attachment rupture. There was a divorce, there was a death, there was a breakdown in a relationship. So it's fair to say that as human beings, we don't get the appropriate training for attachment trauma, whereas it is literally almost the root cause of most of our problems. Mental health issues, our anxieties are relational. Our traumas are relational. So it wasn't until I personally went through a divorce and several, kind of failed relationships later, where I got into this, my last relationship, that woke me up to the fact that I was carrying around some severe attachment trauma that I wasn't even aware of. And it was a kind of like a moment of crisis for me when I realized this. As a chiropractor, I was like, look, I'm dealing with my own stuff here. I've created a methodology that helps people change their perceptions, where I was teaching them in my office, but I needed to go deeper. And after my last relationship breakdown, which ended up with just such a degree of unconsciousness, where we were so volatile with one another. Her abandonment wounds would come up. There was manipulation, there was gaslighting, there was emotional abuse. I'm not excusing my behavior. I'm just saying there was a real toxic kind of container within us where we were both activating one another. And to the point where I lost consciousness. I got physically violent. I slapped her. And that was my wake-up call where, and if I was honest, we did have a few in our 4-year relationship, a few kind of situations where, you know, we would get, you know, shoving and pushing, and it got physical, and it had never happened in my entire life. So I was like, how did this happen? Why are my relationships getting worse? These volatilities, these, you know, love bombing, devaluing, discarding, like the extreme ups and downs since my divorce would just get more and more amplified. And my relationships were like a toxic mess. So it wasn't until that moment that woke me up after I slapped her. I was like, okay, I need to do something. I need to figure this out. I literally stopped working. I stopped coaching other people. I took anger management, therapy, DeMartini work, Byron Katie. Then I tried all the things that I knew, and nothing was really getting to the root. And I remember asking my kind of counselor that I was seeing at the time, I'm like, how do you know this is resolved? Because I really was like, how did this happen? Like, how do I know can make sure that it'll never happen again? And number 3, how can I, if I can do number 1 and 2, I really want to help other people with it. So they said, well, the way that you know when a trigger is healed is if you activate it and you respond differently. And I'm like, oh, geez, I don't like the sounds of that. And at that point, that unknowingly was a gift for me. It was a gift that took me down this path of, you know, you're in the group. It's called my public Facebook community is called Trigger Proof. And that was born from that, because how can an intelligent guy who helps people, uses his hands to help heal other people, how does that person get pushed to be able to slap someone? Why couldn't I have my wits about me at that time? Well, it turns out I'm not the only one, you know. Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, I mean, we're in good company, and many millions of other couples, as it turns out, are dealing with the same thing, where first and foremost, I do want to say not all violence and abuse can be painted under the same brush. There are certain people out there who are, you know, without a doubt, they belong behind bars. You know, you have the Epsteins, you have the Weinsteins, you have R. Kelly, you have these really, you know, mentally ill people that have such little impulse control. They really shouldn't be out in public, you know, and no real desire to make amends or take ownership or anything like that, remorse or anything like that. But there are other cases, more frequent, where it's situational, where if both parties were being honest and, you know, we're not, you know, we can look at it and say, not that it's okay or excusable, but both parties are equally part of the volatility. There's a dynamic happening between them, and it's not working. And traditional talking about it won't work, especially since there's so much shame wrapped around this topic, around sex, around infidelity, around abuse. People don't want to talk about it, but I was gifted by the opportunity, but fate had it that I'm in a situation now where I can really speak openly about it. And the reason why I want to talk about this, and now I'm getting into really racy topics like sex, it's because our unhealed wounds and our unintegrated shadows, these kind of hidden parts of ourselves that we want to pretend are not there, that they're not integrated, meaning we haven't looked at them. We haven't taken the time to understand and appreciate and love these darker parts, our darker material that we all go to therapy to try to pretend is not there. If we don't do the inner work, the embodied somatic work of facing, feeling, releasing these parts and pretending they're not there, we walk around with masks. We lead with manipulation. We can't have authentic relationships. And this is where sexual shadows take over. This is where we have, infidelity. This is where we have addictions with pornography. Like like our society is severely screwed right now because of this. And so I want to lead the conversation, and I'm here now sticking my neck out as a former chiropractor who isn't trained in psychotherapy. I don't have any credentials in terms of like psychotherapy, counseling, anything like that. I'm just a guy who's worked on his traumas, is now studying and furthering and advancing his training with somatic experiencing. And I'm constantly adding more to my toolbox, to this methodology I have, that I'm just a guide for people to become their own medicine, teaching them how to change their relationship with their bodies, because this is the path I had to go through. And to be able to expand that space between stimulus and response, and then choose a new identity based on who they would love to become rather than the same narrative of the past. Because if we don't heal those wounds and integrate those shadows, we literally will have the exact same situation from one relationship to another. So I'm really inspired to change that. And one of the big reasons why I got into this situation was because of my sexual shadows. How did I get here? Well, the person that I chose was a perfect reflection of my sexual shadows. What's that? Well, your sexual shadows are, here, I had some notes here that I wanted to share. I'm going to see where it was here. Give me 1 second. Yeah. Give me 1 second. I wrote some notes. Yes. So your sexual shadows. Pardon me, I just grabbing my notes and seeing where I was going to go from there. When I was younger, my mother kind of caught me, I think I was maybe 3 or 4 years old, and 5 years old even, and I was, playing with myself, and all of a sudden she had a huge reaction. And I remember her taking me to the doctor at that moment and going, what's wrong with him? And I remember the doctor saying, hey, this is normal. But the message that I got was that touching myself, being this area is very bad. And it makes sense. My mom was a young mother. She's trying to do the best she could. She was at the effect of her own sexual shadows, religious upbringing, suppression, oppression. So of course she's going to react when she sees her son acting out his sexuality, which is normal. I have a 2-year-old now. He's constantly playing with his penis, And so thank God I've done this work, because now when I see him, it's like I'm conscious to not bring any shame to this whole topic. But the shadows thrive with shame. Your sexual shadows don't want to be seen. It's these hidden parts of you that we all have, the sexual parts, the parts that are curious about sexuality, that enjoy pleasure, that love to receive and give pleasure sexually, that are sexual beings. But then because of our cultural conditioning, we cast these parts into the dungeon, and sometimes lock them up. But the problem is that sexual energy doesn't go away. It gets dispersed in different areas. And this is the first key point that I want to share, is that not understanding how to direct and to express and direct my sexual energy in healthy ways led to the perfect person that I chose, that caused this massive catastrophe in my life. And sexual shadows were at play, religious upbringing, repressed sexually. And so what happened was I met somebody who was an exact opposite to that upbringing that was totally intriguing to me, right? I repressed my sexuality for the first half of my life, having the fantasies, but outwardly stuffing them away, thinking they're bad. So when I, after my divorce, meet this person, who was she? She was a former exotic dancer turned high-end escort turned madam, who was totally expressive with her sexuality, no holds barred. And we started a relationship because, you know, we had something in common with the personal development work. And she was like, oh, he's going to rescue me from my mental health issues. She had mental health issues. She was like, he's going to fix me, because she saw that I had this methodology. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to get all the crazy ass sex that I want. And she can help me with my business. So it was kind of like both a co-rescuing operation with one another. But the key component here was that I kept her in secrecy, silence, and shame. I couldn't bring her home to my family. I couldn't tell people about what her other business was. So I basically was living incongruently. And that incongruency within a relationship, this lack of integrity, this lack of openness, if you ever experienced living kind of like a double life, creates anxiety, causes the structure, the foundation of the relationship to boil. That pressure causes a pressure because you can't have safety. There's no safety there. This is one of the key components to eroticized wounds, that there's no safety. So we eroticize the things that we are ashamed of or are wounded by. You know, for example, if you've ever, what's an eroticized wound? If you've ever been, if there was ever an experience of being raped, or there was aggressive sex, then all of a sudden you have that wound. Deep down, you want somebody totally safe. And, you know, if you're a woman that experienced that, you'll want a man who might be in his feminine so he feels safe. But deep down, you're fantasizing about that rough kind of, 50 Shades of Grey sex. You know, if you don't believe me, talk about eroticized wounds. What woman hasn't been, majority of women, I think more than a quarter, at least half of women have had the experience of sexual abuse, right? And more than half of them are from family members. So why is it that 50 Shades of Grey is like porn? It's like crack cocaine to women all over the world. Well, eroticized wounds. There are unhealed wounds that cause us deeply desiring that rough kind of takeover, ravishing type of experience. Of course, consensually, that's totally great. That's totally cool. But if they're unhealed wounds, there's a deep desire to go after that. Another example I can give you of an eroticized wound is if your father was emotionally unavailable to you, if you had emotional unavailability, is what you've known. Deep down, you want to connect. So you get horny for emotionally unavailable people, because by fucking them, pardon my language, by fucking them, you get a sense of completion from that wound. So it's a sexual transference of a younger self who was wounded. This is the concept of eroticized wounding, and that was mine. It was eroticized wounding of my sexual shame, where I have this perfect specimen that I could utilize because of the secrecy. It was totally bad. I never really involved her in my family. She would, my brother didn't want her around. My brother's family didn't want her around. But for 4 years, we kept the relationship going, because that cycle of shame and then the sex, it was highly addictive. Now, sexual addictions, pornography, eroticized wounds, one of the major causes that I really wanted to get to today for the topic is the topic of emotional incest. Make sure you subscribe. If when parents' relationship has a breakdown, you have a breakdown in a parent's relationship, and that sexual energy, because of repression, mom and dad aren't fucking. Because of that energy, you have the children, let's say you have a little boy, to cope with the lack of intimacy within mom and dad. I'm going to give an example. Mom might turn around and have an intimate kind of and channel that intimacy that should be to the parents, channels it to the child. And now this little boy then takes on the role of a surrogate partner. Now, even if it's not overtly sexual, where there's touching from mother to son or dad to daughter, okay? Even if by the opposite sex parent, sometimes even the same sex parent, even if it's not an overt touching, that sexual energy is felt by the child and gets confused. And this is where they step up and feel like they're responsible. And while at the same time, they feel very like honored. They feel like they're special. They're daddy's little girl. They're mama's boy. You take care of mom while I'm away now. Or, you know, you take care of daddy while I'm away. You look after you make sure he's taken care of. The child then goes, oh, wow, this is a role that I'm playing, and takes on this role. And this is what's called covert incest or emotional incest. When the mother tells the child, uses the child to get her emotional needs met, or the father uses the child to get their emotional needs met, that is a form of trauma. If you ever had to play this therapist between mom and dad, and they were bitching about the other party to the child, to you, that's a form of trauma to the child. And it's not big T trauma, it's little t trauma, small t trauma, which is very powerful, because now the child doesn't have the capacity to go, oh, not my circus, not my monkeys. Says, oh my gosh, I'm responsible. So then it's like, I got to be safe. To create safety, I got to take on this role of surrogate partner. And now this little boy, for example, deeply resents his mother for that. While at one hand loves that role, on the other hand, deeply resents it. And that was my role. That was my role growing up. Now, how did I respond to that role with this resentment? Well, plus add on an abandonment wound when I was 2. Whew, it's a perfect storm for what? Womanizing. Womanizing is, and affairs are a man, myself, were my way of trying to individuate, trying to finally break free from mom by going out and fucking many women and having different, you know, having the variety. It was as though it was like my way of getting back at my mother. Deep down, there was a resentment towards my mother, but this duty, this sense of duty to look after her emotions. So guess what I would constantly repeat in my relationships? I would repeat the exact same cycle. So we have shame, we have abandonment wound, we have kind of like this sense of duty to look after emotions, and rage towards my mother. And now enter, with shame about sexuality, enter a madam, former exotic dancer, and high-end escort with a fuck ton of her childhood woundings to boot. That, you know, I'm not going to share hers, but let's just say she has complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and which starts in childhood, you know. And so you could argue, I would argue she is undiagnosed borderline personality. I don't call it a disorder, I call it response. And so, not to gaslight, but just ticking off all of the undiagnosed. So I'm sitting there, and the sex was the glue that kept this little toxic dance going. And it wasn't until the gift of this experience where I had a wake-up call, and I could actually say, wow, how do I solve this? How do I make sure this doesn't happen again? And if I can do 1 and 2, can I make sure that I'd like to teach other people how to do it. And this is where all of my work with our Cycle Breakers community was born. And this concept of trigger proof and learning how to regulate your nervous system and integrating the shadows. And I take people now on a path when they're stuck in relational dynamics where the sex isn't satisfying. Gee, I wonder why. There's a attachment trauma there, like I have with my mother. And so in order to heal that, we have to actually individuate from our family system. We have to use, looking up the word individuate, it's concept that came up by Carl Jung, who basically healing is really about breaking free from that enmeshment with the family system. In other words, healing our attachment traumas. And so the whole process involves a rewiring of our system, working through our emotions towards mom, our resentment, learning how to assess and have boundaries. And when I got that, in comes in Diana in my life. And the relationship felt totally different. I was like worried. I didn't never want to get married again because I didn't trust myself. But when I met her and we went through our challenges for the first 6 months of, like any relationship comes, we're trying to figure out boundaries and working through any ruptures and then repair in very beautiful ways. The energy of that container totally was different. There was no volatility. And so through the relationship container, I was able to heal as I work with healing myself. I was able to rewire my system to be able to have a relationship where I could set boundaries with my mother. My first marriage completely collapsed because my mother would have her opinions, and I would let them get to me. And then it would kind of poison my view of my wife to the point where I just left. I was like, I can't be in the middle of these two. My mother, I just didn't have the capacity to set a boundary. But within the first 2 months of my relationship with Diana, when we went over to my mom's place and my mom tried her old shenanigans again, this time I showed up differently. And the way that my mother did that, she, because of the enmeshment, when a mother doesn't do this is why it's so important for you, if you're a mother to children, and especially if you've gone through divorce or breakup and separation and you're leaning on your kids, guess what's going to happen? That little boy is going to grow up to be a womanizer and to treat his wife the way your husband treated you. I don't want that to happen. That's my biggest challenge. My biggest reason why is because the most well-meaning parents unconsciously are passing this down. So I was able to show up to my mother, and her way of doing it, because it was like no woman I was ever with was good enough. She was always complaining. This is one of the signs and symptoms of emotional incest, is this constant, like, mama's boy feeling, like, I just don't want to displease, like the sense of being displeasing my mother was just, so it's like, who am I going to choose? It's got to be according to what my mom wants, because I can't handle her displeasure. Even though I'm a doctor of chiropractic, 40-something years old, successful, that shit is in the body. It's not here. It doesn't make sense here. It's in the body. So I was able to, and what was my mother's kind of way of doing it? She shows, my mom's my mom. She's just Persian mother. It's not going to change overnight. She goes and tries to triangulate with Diana. She goes and tries to say, oh, let me tell you about Nima's exes. This and that. Oh, we don't like this and this. And Diana was like uncomfortable. She would come to tell me, and I was like, fuck, she's trying to sabotage my relationship again. This is why no relationship of mine could ever work, because there was this sabotage going on. But this time I had rewired my system, and I was able to lovingly set a boundary and say, Mom, you're never going to talk about any ex of mine again to Diana. I really care about her. So I just wanted to take a moment to share with you some of the incredible revelations that I've had in my journey from being a chiropractor to learning how to heal my attachment traumas, take these toxic patterns in my relationships and turn it into a beautiful, secure relationship. And in this journey of my own healing, I'm kind of committed to the path of sharing with others what I learn and guiding people down a similar path. No need to diagnose, no need to treat, no need to label. It's just giving people the tools to become their own medicine, to heal from anxious attachment, avoidant attachment like I was, to be able to have healthy, secure love. Now, I've deliberately left out two very important topics in this world of healing trauma and breaking trauma bonds. And these topics, it's gotten to a point where I really can't ignore it anymore. I couldn't ignore it anymore, being in my own life and in the lives of the clients and the students that we work with. And that's in the realm of our trauma stories with sex and with money. But I deliberately don't really share much about it. Why? Well, because I've been in the process of unpacking and healing my own sexual shadows. And I didn't want to share anything coming from a wound. I wanted to share from a place of a scar, not a wound. And so that's happening. And I'm coming out with it now. And these two very taboo subjects that people have a lot of emotional charge about, for good reason, because of our cultural conditioning and the traumas that we've experienced, we're holding on to a lot of shame with these two topics, sex and money. And that's why I've now started to create trainings and an event that's actually coming up very soon. If you check and click the link below, it's a 3-day event. And it's all about helping people with the most common complaints that we get when people DM me. They talk about being stuck in a marriage or having challenges connecting and wanting to know if they should stay or go. But that's the surface complaint. What's really happening is there's an infidelity that hadn't been healed. There are sexual fantasies that we feel judged by. There are addictions. There's pornography. There's fantasy. There's feelings of completely losing your sex drive, right? There's all of that happening. And all of that comes from cultural conditioning and hardwired trauma stories from our early attachments with mom and dad. And it's time we had the conversation about sex and money. And so I'm creating a container that's coming up very soon. Follow the link, where you're going to learn how to untangle this wiring that has you feeling like you're not supposed to have good sex and you're not supposed to receive abundance and prosperity. Consider that it doesn't even come from you. It's in your wiring. So Rewire Trauma, Sex, and Money is an exposure of everything that's ever held you back from having great sex and prosperity. And this is a conversation about healing so that we can rewire and heal from our past, the narratives, the family system rules, the religious, the cultural conditioning that has you pushing love, pushing abundance, pushing intimacy away unconsciously through no fault of your own, and changing that narrative inside of your body. And here's the best part, it's only limited to 200 people, because we're going to be doing breakout rooms. We're going to be talking about it within groups of people so that you can see that you're not alone. Because shame can't exist in the light. To heal from shame, which we're all holding on to, sex and money, it exists in your darkness, in the darkness, and it thrives in secrecy, silence, and shame. So this event is 3 days. It's intense. You block off everything else with intention to rewire your money and sex story so that you can then feel safer in your body. So follow that link below, jump in, join us. And if you jump in sooner rather than later, you get to join in the upcoming overview experience that's coming soon. You get a ticket to that absolutely free. And those of you who do the VIP actually get my course called the Intimacy Accelerator, which is about 25 hours of pure fire content, 6 workshops. And normally that was the retail investment of $2,000. You're getting that for free with the VIP enrollment. So I don't know about you, but I'm pretty freaking stoked, and I'm nervous. I'm nervous. I'm telling you right now, I'm nervous about having this conversation because it's a highly triggering conversation. That's why we have a intake form, a survey. We want to get to know you, make sure that you're ready for this level of activation. We're going to be talking about sex. Sometimes your sex traumas are going to come up. Everything that has you believing that you're not worthy of having great sex with a committed partner. Everything that has you believing that you're not worthy of receiving prosperity while giving your gift. That makes you an asshole, that makes you evil, it makes you a predator, makes you manipulative. All that bullshit is in your wiring. And I've been working on mine, and I'm ready to teach you how to work on yours. See you at the next perfect time. Fast forward to today, we're married. We have a beautiful 2-year-old. And the greatest gift that I can give my son to help break the cycle is to maintain a beautiful, secure, highly sexual relationship with my wife. So she feels safe, and that sexual energy is actually displayed between husband and wife, between partners, instead of us lacking intimacy and then my son taking up the slack, which is exactly how the cycle continues. Are you getting what I'm putting down here? None of this is your fault. If you can relate to what I'm saying, please, I'm not trying to call you out. I don't even know you personally. I'm just sharing with you what we talk about in our Cycle Breakers community and why I'm so passionate about teaching people how to rewire their nervous systems, heal their sexual trauma, and expand their creativity, to heal in the present, to complete the past, so that you can actually create the future. Create. Sexual energy is creative. So that's also entangled with your finances. So if you've been stuck sexually and you're wondering, is there something wrong with me? I want you to know there's nothing wrong with you. If you're wondering as well, and you're suspecting that your past unresolved wounds are impacting your shame, the way you show up sexually, do you feel it's bad? Do you feel you're ugly? Do you suppress yourself? Are you an addict? You can't stop sexting? You have a fear of commitment? Guess what? All of it makes sense. There's nothing wrong with you. There's just a potential of trauma in the form, potentially, I don't know your specific case, of emotional incest. And it's not here to blame parents. I'm not just sitting and blaming parents, but I'm just holding human beings accountable because I had to hold myself accountable. I'm not blaming anyone else. There's no one really to blame. It's all passed down from generation to generation. If we don't have the courage to stand up and have the conversation, then we're fucked. So I'm here having the conversation. Let me know what comes up for you here. For those of you, I mean, we've already amazed by how people have been responding to this. As I've been telling my community, the priority has gone to my current community, but I'm opening the invitation for you. We have an upcoming event called Rewire: Trauma, Sex, and Money. The most important arguments that happen in a household: sex and money. And you can't just try to take communication courses to solve it. This is about rewiring the nervous system. I just shared with you the story of how I was wired. I didn't have a fucking chance. No relationship of mine stood a chance with the conditioning and the wiring that was happening before. And I remember going, I don't care whatever distance I have to travel, whatever price I have to pay. There's something that's I'm missing. I want to learn how to have, I want to learn how to solve it, because I want to have great sex in a committed relationship, not eroticized wounding with anxiety. How do you know eroticized wounds is not happening? Is having emotional safety while having sex. That might be a weird experience for you because you might be addicted to the anxiety of it. And there's a lot of conversation that we have in this, in the Rewire conversation on addictions, suppression, inhibition, like all the way from being an addict to money or sex to completely being an inhibited, repressed, pushing it away. Those are two extremes that have very similar root cause. And I want to help bring the conversation into balance. We're going to be talking about money. We're going to be talking about sex. We're going to be talking about shame. We're going to be talking about sexual trauma. We're going to be talking about incest. We're going to be talking about all this stuff that causes people to get really uncomfortable. So if that's not, that you're not ready for that, this kind of event is really not for you. And also we're going to be using the F word. We're going to be using the word cock and balls and the P word. I probably won't use the C word. I know a few of my client students, this one gal, Tegan, she just can't stop using that C word, everything. I think they use it in New Zealand quite a bit. You know, oh, he's a GC. He's a good C word. I won't be using that word, but I'll be using the other one. So if any of that is a problem for you, that's not for you. It's also really neat because it's a 3-day full event. I'll leave the link there below. The early bird ends very soon, and then it goes to full ticket price. But also for people, there's an option for VIP, and VIP gets you a lunchtime on Friday with Dr. John DeMartini, my mentor, who's really taught me a lot of the stuff that I've learned. And he is a lot of the stuff, like his framework is pretty brilliant. He's going to be talking about the neuroscience of deserving. That's what he's going to be talking about, the neuroscience of deserving, if that's interesting to you. Also with the VIP ticket, you get not only a recording of the entire thing, but you're also going to get a copy of my 25-hour course that's been retired, valued at $2,000 US, free of charge. So that is all included with it, and a post-integration call. So we've had tons of people sign up for the VIP, and it's really a ridiculously low price because we're going to be doing it on Zoom, and I'm going to request your feedback, because in the future, we're going to do it live, but based on your feedback, if you're coming, I'm going to keep refining it. So this is kind of like a beta testing investment. So if you're down, if you're ready to go, the link is below, and it's super duper affordable. The ticket price is only $397, but then for VIP, it's double that, and you get a $2,000 investment training that you can go at your own pace. It's a 6-week training that you can go on your own pace, free of charge. I give it to you as a gift. And there's also a Facebook community that we're going to be in, that I'm going to invite people in. And I'll leave the link below. If this lands for you, let me know, and I'll see you at the next perfect time. Let me know what came up for you or any questions that you have with this conversation.